I've replayed that moment in my head so many times that it no longer feels like memory. It feels like a scene burned into my skin. The music was soft. The scent of vanilla cupcakes and fresh roses hung in the air, and Clara, glowing in her pale pink dress, was surrounded by friends and family, all smiling, all sipping lemonade from glass jars. I was standing just a few steps behind her, my hand loosely holding a gift bag with baby clothes I had chosen so carefully, I almost cried at the register. And then, without warning, Clara turned to me, her voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "You will never hold this child." The music didn't stop, but the room did. Conversations faltered mid-word. I felt dozens of eyes pin me to the spot. The words were not whispered, not accidental. They were sharp, deliberate, and meant to leave a mark. Daniel's face was the first I searched for. My husband stood across the room, frozen mid-laugh, a small plate of hors d'oeuvres in his hand. His expression shifted from confusion to something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe? He looked at me, then at his sister, then back again, as if calculating which version of himself he needed to be in this moment, the protective husband or the loyal brother. Clara, meanwhile, had already turned away from me, as if the matter was settled, bending to accept another gift from a friend, with a smile so warm you could almost believe the cruelty in her voice had been imagined. But it wasn't imagined. I could still feel the sting of it on my skin. The guests began whispering, a few offering me awkward, apologetic smiles. My instinct was to leave right then, to drop the gift bag and walk out before the tears gathering behind my eyes betrayed me. But some stubborn part of me refused to give Clara that satisfaction. I smiled, a cold, tight smile, and took a step back toward the wall, my heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. The rest of the baby shower was a haze. I remember people taking photos, laughter that felt rehearsed, the clinking of glasses. Clara avoided my gaze, as though I wasn't even there. I stood near the dessert table, sipping a lemonade I couldn't taste, watching her bask in the attention, her hand resting protectively over her belly. Every so often, Evelyn, my mother-in-law, would glance at me with that expression she'd perfected over the years, a mixture of pity and quiet triumph. She didn't say a word, but she didn't have to. I thought about all the times I had tried to bridge the gap with Clara, the birthday gifts, the thoughtful messages, the offers to help when she'd been sick. Each attempt had been met with either cold politeness or outright dismissal, and now, in front of her closest friends, she had drawn a line I could not cross, a line that cut right through the heart of what should have been a moment of shared joy. Daniel eventually came to stand beside me, his presence radiating discomfort. "She didn't mean it like that," he muttered under his breath, his eyes darting to make sure no one was listening. I almost laughed, the sound bitter in my throat. "How exactly did she mean it, Daniel?" I asked, but he had no answer. He just sighed and told me to let it go, for now. The words lodged in me like splinters. As the party ended, I handed Clara the gift bag. She accepted it without looking at me, her fingers brushing mine for only the briefest second, cold, tense, unyielding. That was when I knew this wasn't just a moment of pregnancy hormones, or some petty jab she'd regret. This was a warning, and though I didn't understand it yet, I could feel it in my bones. Clara was protecting something, and whatever it was, she believed it was worth destroying me to keep it hidden. The drive home was suffocating. Rain tapped against the windshield in soft, uneven rhythms, the kind that should have been calming, but instead felt like a countdown to something I didn't want to face. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel just a little too tightly. I stared out the passenger window, watching the world blur into streaks of gray and yellow light, my mind replaying Clara's voice again and again, until it became less of a sentence and more of a brand burned into my memory. "You will never hold this child." It didn't even sound real, except that every cell in my body knew it was. We didn't speak for the first 15 minutes. The silence between us wasn't just absence of words. It was a wall, thick and impenetrable, built from years of unspoken resentments and half-answered questions. Daniel finally cleared his throat, as if the quiet was physically choking him. "Hannah, you can't take everything she says to heart," he began, but his tone lacked conviction. I turned to him slowly, searching for even the smallest flicker of outrage on my behalf. There was none, just weariness. "So I'm supposed to shrug it off when your sister humiliates me in front of your whole family?" I asked, my voice low but shaking with the force of what I was holding back. He exhaled sharply, his knuckles whitening on the wheel. She's pregnant, Hannah. Emotional. She's not thinking straight. I almost laughed. Almost. But the sound that came out was closer to a scoff. No, Daniel. She knew exactly what she was doing. And you knew too. That's why you didn't say a damn thing. His jaw tightened. His gaze fixed ahead. And that silence came back. Heavier now. Pressing against my chest until breathing felt like effort. Somewhere deep down, I wanted him to pull over. To turn to me and tell me that Clara's words were unacceptable. That he would fix it. That he had my back. But Daniel was a man who avoided conflict like it was fire. He thought that silence was a way to keep the peace, when in reality, it only let the flames spread. I realized then that if I wanted the truth about Clara, about what lay underneath her hostility, I would have to dig for it myself. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the rain had picked up, smearing the streetlights into trembling halos. I sat in the car for a moment after Daniel got out, my fingers curled tightly around my phone. Part of me wanted to call my best friend Emily, to spill everything, and feel her outrage like a bomb. But another part, the sharper, colder part, wanted to keep this close to my chest, to turn it over quietly, until I could see the edges of the bigger picture. Inside the house, the silence continued. Daniel went upstairs without another word, the sound of his footsteps fading into the bedroom. I lingered in the living room, staring at the half-packed box of Christmas decorations in the corner, the fairy lights tangled and lifeless. We had been planning to decorate the tree that night, but now it felt absurd. The image of Clara's smug smile clung to me like smoke. And yet, beneath the humiliation, there was something else, a flicker of curiosity, because when she'd said those words, there had been a strange light in her eyes, not just anger, not just superiority. It was something closer to fear, and that, more than anything, made me wonder, what was she so afraid I would see if I ever held that child? The next morning, I woke before the alarm, my mind already restless. Daniel was still asleep beside me, one arm sprawled across the bed, his breathing deep and even. I slipped out of bed quietly, padding into the kitchen where the early light spilled in through the blinds, painting the countertop in narrow stripes. I made coffee, the smell wrapping around me like something familiar and safe, but the moment I sipped it, Clara's voice cut through my thoughts like glass. You will never hold this child. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise, and one she meant to keep. I sat at the table, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, when I heard Daniel's voice from upstairs. At first, I thought he was talking to himself, but then the muted cadence of another voice reached me. Clara. My chest tightened instantly. I shouldn't have listened. I knew that. But something in her tone, a clipped urgency, made me pause. I crept halfway up the stairs, close enough to catch the edges of their conversation. You can't let her near me, Daniel. I'm serious. Clara's voice was sharp, almost shaking. You know what's at stake. There was a pause. And then Daniel's voice, low and steady. Clara, you're overreacting. Hannah's not going to. Overreacting? She snapped, cutting him off. If she finds out, everything will fall apart. I'm not risking that. Do you understand? I froze. If she finds out. The words lodged in my mind like a splinter. Find out what? What could possibly be so damaging that Clara would go this far to keep me away from her baby? My breath felt shallow, my heart thudding so loudly I was afraid they'd hear it through the walls. Daniel said something I couldn't make out. Then Clara's voice softened, almost breaking. You promised me, Daniel. You promised. I stepped back quickly, my hand gripping the banister as if it could anchor me. My coffee sat cooling in the kitchen, forgotten. The conversation upstairs ended with the low creak of the bedroom door, and I darted back into the living room before Daniel came down. I didn't want him to know I'd heard a thing. Not yet. I needed time to process, to figure out my next move. When he finally appeared, his hair slightly disheveled and eyes avoiding mine, I knew without a doubt that he was hiding something. He kissed the top of my head like nothing was wrong, like we were just another ordinary couple on an ordinary morning. But I could feel the lie in it. It clung to him like a scent, faint but impossible to ignore. The rest of the day, I moved through the house like a shadow, my mind spinning. Clara's hostility wasn't random. It was calculated. And Daniel, he wasn't just passively letting it happen. He was involved. The thought was like ice in my veins. That night, lying in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in around me. I knew one thing for certain. Whatever secret Clara was hiding, Daniel was holding it too. The tension between Daniel and me settled into the air like a heavy, invisible fog. We didn't fight. but silence had a way of saying more than words could. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I lay there listening to the soft hum of the heater and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. My thoughts kept circling back to Clara's voice. Those words, "If she finds out, everything will fall apart." I needed answers, but Daniel clearly wasn't going to give them to me. If I wanted the truth, I'd have to go looking for it myself. The next day, I waited until Daniel left for work, the sound of his car fading down the street. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door of the guest room. Clara had stayed there a few nights during her pregnancy, claiming she needed to be close to Daniel for family reasons whenever her husband was out of town. I'd always found it strange. She lived only 15 minutes away. Now, that room felt like a vault holding something I wasn't supposed to see. I opened the door slowly, the faint scent of lavender still lingering in the air. The bed was neatly made, untouched since her last stay, but there was a stack of boxes against the wall I didn't remember seeing before. My pulse quickened as I knelt and pulled the top one toward me. Inside were neatly folded baby clothes, some new with tags, others worn and faded as if they'd been packed away for years. But tucked beneath them, wrapped in tissue paper, was something that made my breath catch. An old photograph of Daniel, Clara, and a woman I didn't recognize. The woman in the picture had Daniel's eyes and Clara's smile, but she wasn't their mother. I knew that much. She was holding a baby, and the way Daniel and Clara stood beside her made it clear this child was important to them. On the back of the photo, written in smudged ink, were the words, "For Hannah, someday, when you know the truth." My hands trembled. For me, whoever this woman was, she had left something meant for me, and Clara had been keeping it hidden. I searched the rest of the box frantically, finding only a few more photographs and a crumpled letter sealed in an envelope without a stamp. My name was written across the front in the same delicate handwriting as the photo inscription. My heart pounded as I considered opening it right there, but something stopped me. I didn't know why, but it felt dangerous, like crossing a line I couldn't step back from. I tucked the letter into my sweater pocket and quickly returned the rest of the items to the box. As I closed the guest room door, I felt a shift inside me, something between dread and determination. Whatever this was, Clara had gone to great lengths to keep it from me, and Daniel had helped her. That alone was reason enough to see it through. That night, at dinner, I studied Daniel's face under the warm kitchen light. He laughed at something on his phone, his fork tapping lightly against his plate, but I could see it now, the flicker of tension in his eyes, the way he avoided lingering on me too long. He didn't know I had the letter, and for now, I wasn't going to tell him. Not until I knew exactly what it said. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the envelope in my sweater pocket like a stone pressing against my ribs. The words on the back of that photograph, "For Hannah, someday, when you know the truth," looped in my mind like an unrelenting whisper. I knew waiting would only make the weight of it worse. At 2:13 a.m., I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Daniel, and went to the kitchen, the cold tile under my bare feet jolting me awake. The envelope felt fragile in my hands, as if it might disintegrate from the heat of my touch. My fingers trembled as I tore it open, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness of the house. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. The handwriting was the same delicate script as on the photo, and I could smell a faint trace of perfume, familiar, but just out of reach, like a memory I couldn't place. "Hannah," it began, "if you're reading this, then Clara has failed to keep her promise. There's no easy way to tell you what I'm about to say. You've lived your life believing certain things about your marriage, about your place in this family, and I'm sorry to tell you, not all of them are true." My throat tightened as my eyes moved down the page. "You don't know me, but I've watched over you from a distance for years. My name is Evelyn, and before you married Daniel, he and Clara were hiding something from you, something that concerns the baby she's carrying now." The next lines made my stomach churn. "That child is not just her son or daughter. That child is a piece of you, in a way you never consented to. Clara used something that was never hers to take." My mind reeled. I read it again, slower this time, but the words didn't make any more sense. A piece of me? How? I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. Evelyn's letter went on, telling me that several years ago, when Daniel and I were struggling with fertility issues, Clara had intervened in a way I never knew about. There were no specifics in this letter, only hints that medical decisions had been made without my knowledge, choices that had tied my DNA to Clara's pregnancy. The paper trembled in my hands. I didn't want to believe it, but the certainty in Evelyn's tone and the secrecy surrounding the box in the guest room told me this wasn't a cruel joke. I read the final lines over and over. When the time comes, you will need proof, and you will need to be strong. The truth will hurt, Hannah, but it will also set you free. I'm counting on you. No signature, no date, just the faint perfume and the weight of 1,000 questions pressing into my chest. I folded the letter back up, but I couldn't put it away. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the dark window, my reflection ghostly in the glass. Somewhere in this tangled mess was an answer that would either shatter my marriage or force it into the light. And I knew, deep down, that Clara wasn't going to give it willingly. The next morning, I moved through the house in a haze, my mind still trapped inside the words from Evelyn's letter. Daniel had already left for work, leaving his coffee mug half-finished on the counter, the faint swirl of cream still visible. I stared at it for a moment, wondering how a man could look you in the eyes every day and still keep something so big locked away. But today wasn't about confronting him. Not yet. Today was about Clara. I dressed carefully, not in my usual soft sweaters, but in a crisp blouse and dark jeans, clothes that made me feel like I had armor. I told myself it was just a casual visit, but in truth, I was going to see how far I could push her without crossing the line into open accusation. Clara's house was only a 15-minute drive, but the tension in my hands on the steering wheel made it feel longer. She answered the door wearing a silk robe and holding a mug of herbal tea, her belly rounding beneath the fabric like a badge of pride. "Hannah," she said with exaggerated surprise, though I noticed the quick flicker of something in her eyes before the smile landed. "What brings you here so early?" I shrugged, forcing my tone into something light. "Thought I'd drop by and check on you. See how you're doing." Her living room was immaculate, every throw pillow aligned, the scent of expensive candles heavy in the air. I sat across from her, legs crossed, my eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. As she chattered about nursery colors and prenatal yoga, I decided to drop my first pebble into the pond. "It's funny," I said casually. "I've been thinking a lot about family resemblances lately, how a child can sometimes look like more than one person in ways you'd never expect." Her hands, perfectly manicured, tightened ever so slightly around her mug. "Well," she said, her voice a fraction too steady, "genetics can be strange that way." I nodded slowly, studying her. "They can," I agreed, "but they don't usually cross lines without intention." That made her blink. Once, twice, and then she leaned back, eyes narrowing just enough to tell me I'd brushed against a nerve. She changed the subject quickly, asking about Daniel's work schedule and the weather, but her gaze kept flickering toward me like she was trying to gauge how much I knew. I played along, laughing when appropriate, answering her questions as if nothing had shifted in the air between us. But inside, I felt the tension coiling tighter, a silent confirmation that Evelyn's letter wasn't just some cruel fabrication. When I finally stood to leave, Clara walked me to the door, her smile stretched thin. "We should have you over for dinner soon," she said, her tone sweet, but edged with something else, something almost defensive. I returned the smile, letting my eyes linger on hers. "I'd like that," I replied. "I think we have a lot to talk about." And for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear cross her face. The moment I closed Clara's front door behind me, the cold air bit my cheeks, but it was nothing compared to the frost she'd left in my chest. That flicker of fear I'd seen in her eyes wasn't just a reaction, it was confirmation. Still, suspicion was just smoke. If I wanted the truth, I needed fire, and to find it, I'd have to start digging where no one wanted me to. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove to the little coffee shop near the hospital where Clara's prenatal appointments were scheduled. I knew the receptionist there, Emily, a sweet, talkative woman who had once worked with me on a community fundraiser. I wasn't there to cross any obvious lines. I just wanted to plant seeds and see what grew. I asked her how things were going, then casually slipped in Clara's name. Her brow furrowed slightly before she caught herself and smiled, saying only, "Oh yes, I've seen her around." It wasn't much, but her hesitation told me there was more behind the curtain. That night, when Daniel went to bed early with the excuse of a long day at work, I stayed in the living room, my laptop balanced on my knees. I searched for anything linking Clara to the name that had been haunting me since Evelyn's letter, Andrew Miles. At first, I found nothing. No social media connections, no family records. But then, buried in an old charity event press release from 3 years ago, there it was. Clara's name listed alongside Andrew's as co-sponsors. It shouldn't have meant much. People sponsor events together all the time. But Andrew wasn't just anyone. He was a former colleague of Daniel's, the one who had been let go under mysterious circumstances after a very public falling out. Daniel had never told me the details, only that Andrew couldn't be trusted. Now I was beginning to wonder if that warning had been about more than business. The connection opened a floodgate of questions I couldn't answer. Had Daniel known Clara before I came into the family? Had Andrew been part of their lives longer than anyone admitted? And why would Clara's name show up alongside his at an event she'd never mentioned to anyone? Not even during her endless boasts about her social network? The more I stared at the screen, the more my heart pounded in my ears. I printed the article and tucked it into a manila folder I kept hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk, the same place I'd hidden Evelyn's letter. This wasn't proof, not yet, but it was a thread, and if I pulled hard enough, I had the sickening feeling the whole thing might unravel. Before bed, I paused at the doorway to our bedroom, watching Daniel sleep. His face looked peaceful, untroubled, almost boyish, but the sight didn't calm me. It only deepened the ache in my chest, because I was no longer sure if the man lying there beside me was part of the truth I was chasing, or part of the lie. I didn't plan it, at least not consciously. The idea came like a whisper in the back of my mind, and refused to leave. By Friday morning, it had wrapped itself around my resolve, and I found myself driving to the upscale boutique where Clara often bragged about picking up essentials for the baby. My stomach churned with the ugly thrill of what I was about to do. I told myself it wasn't spying. I was just observing, listening. That was all. The boutique's large glass windows framed a display of pastel blankets and delicate baby clothes. I lingered outside, pretending to admire a crocheted bassinet, until Clara's voice floated to me from inside. She was standing by the counter, speaking in that low, clipped tone she used when she didn't want to be overheard. But she wasn't alone. The man beside her, tall, with sandy hair and a familiar set to his shoulders, made my pulse quicken. I knew that posture. Even without seeing his face, I knew it was Andrew Miles. They weren't browsing. They were leaning in toward each other, as if each word carried weight. I edged closer to the door, letting the soft jingle of another customer's entrance mask my movement. Through the racks of clothes, I caught fragments of their conversation. Still not ready. Daniel can't know. And then, more faintly, after the baby's here. My heart lodged in my throat. The words could have meant anything, but paired with the secrecy, they felt dangerous. Andrew's gaze darted toward the front, and I ducked behind a display before he could see me. My hands were trembling so badly I had to clutch the wooden edge of the stand to steady myself. I hated how this made me feel, like an intruder in my own life, desperate for scraps of truth, while everyone else moved freely in the shadows. When they finally left, I followed at a safe distance, my boots crunching on the salted sidewalk. They didn't notice me. Their heads were bent together, voices hushed. I watched them stop beside a sleek black car, Andrew's hand brushing Clara's arm in a way that seemed far too familiar for a man who was supposedly nothing to her. She laughed lightly at something he said, a laugh that was sharper, less guarded than the one she gave the rest of us. I wanted to run to Daniel, to throw the truth at his feet and demand an explanation. But deep down, I knew I didn't have enough yet. All I had was implication and an ache in my chest that wouldn't let me breathe. Going to him now would only give Clara the chance to twist the narrative. So I drove home in silence, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel, my mind replaying every word, every gesture I'd witnessed. I told myself I was done being passive. From now on, I would be deliberate, strategic. If Clara and Andrew were hiding something, I'd be ready to drag it into the light. And I wouldn't stop until I knew exactly what "after the baby's here" meant. By Sunday afternoon, the pressure inside me felt unbearable. Every thought, every suspicion about Clara and Andrew had been looping endlessly in my head until I could barely hear my own reasoning. Daniel had been working late shifts at the clinic, leaving me alone with my restless mind and the gnawing weight of unspoken truths. I knew I couldn't keep carrying this by myself, not without breaking. That's why I called Emily. Emily had always been the one person I could rely on to cut through the fog. She'd been my best friend since college, the kind who could read my silences better than most people could read my words. When she answered on the second ring, her voice warm but alert, I asked if I could come over. I didn't tell her what it was about. Some things are easier face to face. Her apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee when I stepped inside. The soft hum of the kettle filled the space as she gestured for me to sit. "Hannah," she said, settling across from me, "you look like you've been carrying a ghost on your back. What's going on?" Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. That was Emily, never one to be fooled by polite deflections. I told her everything. The boutique, the conversation, the way Andrew's hand brushed Clara's arm, the words I'd overheard. My voice trembled at points, but once I started I couldn't stop. It poured out of me in a rush, weeks of unease, suspicion, and half-formed fears finding their way into sentences. I expected Emily to frown in solidarity, maybe to offer the kind of pragmatic advice she was known for, but she didn't. She leaned back, crossing her arms, her expression tightening in a way I couldn't read. "Hannah, are you sure you're not reading too much into this?" The question was calm, almost careful, but it sliced through me like a blade. Clara's always been complicated. But if you go to Daniel with this, and you're wrong. She let the sentence trail off, the silence heavy between us. "I'm not wrong," I said, a little too quickly. My chest felt tight. "Emily, I saw it, heard it. I'm not imagining things." I was hoping for reassurance, but she only sighed, looking toward the window as if the bare winter trees outside had more to offer than my face. And then, almost as an afterthought, she said, "You know, I've seen Andrew around town a lot lately. More than I expected." She didn't elaborate, and when I pressed, she just shook her head, muttering something about running into him at the grocery store. But her evasiveness only deepened my unease. When I left her apartment that evening, the streets were quiet, the snow beginning to fall in soft, relentless flakes. My confession hadn't brought me the relief I'd hoped for. Instead, it left me with a new question gnawing at the edges of my mind, one I hadn't anticipated. If Emily knew more than she was saying, whose side was she really on? The following week, I tried to push Emily's odd reaction out of my mind, telling myself I was just exhausted, hypersensitive, and maybe even desperate to see betrayal where none existed. But that didn't stop the unease from creeping in whenever I replayed our conversation. I kept thinking about her choice of words, the subtle way she'd questioned my certainty, the strange flicker in her eyes when I mentioned Andrew's name. It wasn't like her to dodge questions, and yet she had. By Thursday evening, I found myself pacing around my kitchen, phone in hand, trying to decide whether to call her again or give her space. I was in the middle of pouring tea when my phone buzzed, Emily's name lighting up the screen. The second I answered, I realized she hadn't meant to call me. Voices were overlapping, muffled at first, but then her tone rose clear and sharp. "Yes, I spoke to her," Emily was saying. "She's suspicious. I don't think she'll let it go." My stomach dropped. There was a pause, then a male voice, familiar, too familiar, answered, "Andrew." I froze, my hand tightening on the counter's edge. "Don't worry," Emily continued. "I told her she might be wrong. It'll make her hesitate before she does anything. But you need to be careful around Clara. She's not as subtle as she thinks." The clink of a coffee cup against a table came through the line, followed by Andrew's low reply, too muffled to make out entirely. But I caught enough. "We can't risk Daniel finding out. Not yet." My mind raced, heat flushing my face. This wasn't just casual conversation. This was a conspiracy. And Emily, my Emily, was in the middle of it. I hung up before they could realize the call was connected, my pulse hammering in my ears. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at my phone as if it had betrayed me too. Everything inside me screamed to call Daniel right then, to spill every word, every suspicion, every piece of evidence. But a colder, sharper instinct told me to wait. If Emily was feeding Andrew information about me, telling Daniel now could tip them off before I understood the full scope of what they were hiding. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I kept hearing her voice, Emily, my best friend, casually dismantling my credibility, weaving doubt into Andrew's favor. And the worst part was, I still didn't know why. What was she getting out of this? Loyalty to Clara? A debt to Andrew? Or something even darker? By midnight, I'd made my decision. If I couldn't trust Emily to tell me the truth, I'd have to find it myself. I would follow Andrew, watch Clara, dig into the corners of their lives they thought were hidden. I was done being the passive observer in my own story. They wanted me hesitant. They wanted me doubting myself. They were about to learn I was capable of far more than they imagined. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, my thoughts already racing ahead of my body. Sleep had been impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Emily's voice again, laced with quiet treachery. I didn't bother with breakfast. Instead, I dressed in dark jeans, a plain hoodie, and my oldest sneakers, clothes that wouldn't stand out. It felt ridiculous at first, this creeping around like some amateur detective. But if Emily and Andrew were conspiring, I needed proof. I parked my car 3 blocks from Andrew's apartment and waited. The street was quiet, the early light casting long, pale shadows. At exactly 8:17, his black sedan pulled out from the driveway. He didn't head toward the office as I'd expected, but instead took a sharp left toward the older part of town, the area dotted with historic houses and small, privately owned shops. I kept my distance, heart pounding every time a light turned red. After 20 minutes, Andrew slowed near an unmarked brick building with tall windows covered in sheer curtains. There was no sign, no logo, nothing to suggest what it was. He parked out front, checked his phone, and then slipped inside without glancing back. My first instinct was to follow immediately, but something told me to wait, to watch. Through a narrow gap in the curtains, I caught flashes of movement, shadows crossing the room, someone in a pale dress, a tall man leaning close to Andrew. 15 minutes passed before I saw her. Clara. She emerged from the far side of the room, cradling her stomach, her face calm, but her eyes darting like a trapped animal's. She moved toward Andrew, and he stood, placing a hand on her arm with a familiarity that twisted my gut. It wasn't the touch of a concerned acquaintance. It was intimate, protective. My throat went dry. What was Clara doing here with him? And why? In a place so hidden. I shifted closer, careful to stay out of sight. A man in a dark suit joined them, carrying a folder. They spoke in low voices, heads bent together. At one point, Clara glanced toward the window, and I ducked behind a nearby lamppost, my pulse roaring in my ears. When I dared peek again, I saw Andrew take the folder, flip it open, and slide a paper across the table for Clara to sign. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen. The air felt heavy, charged with something I didn't yet understand. My mind scrambled through possibilities. Was it about the baby? A legal transfer? Money? My instincts screamed that whatever this was, it wasn't just personal. It was calculated, deliberate, and it wasn't meant for my eyes. When Andrew finally stepped back outside, I had to force myself not to confront him then and there, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed to know exactly what was in that folder. I needed to understand the full game they were playing before I made my move. As I followed him back toward the main road, a chilling thought settled over me. Whatever Clara had just signed, it was the first move in something much bigger, and I had no idea yet how dangerous it might be. The image of Clara signing that paper burned into my mind like a scar I couldn't erase. That night, lying in bed, I replayed every detail, the tilt of her head, the way Andrew's hand hovered just above hers as if guiding her, the strange, quiet determination in her face. It was the kind of moment you could tell wasn't meant to be witnessed, and I knew deep down it was the key to everything. I also knew I couldn't ask Andrew directly. He'd spin a neat little lie, tuck it behind a smile, and I'd be left feeling like a paranoid fool. The next day, I drove back to that brick building, hoping to catch someone, anyone, who could tell me what it was. But the street was different now. The curtains were drawn tight, the front door locked, and there was no sign it had been open at all. I walked the block twice, scanning for cameras or business names, but there was nothing, just the faint scent of coffee drifting from a cafe across the street. The barista watched me curiously as I hovered near the door again, probably wondering why I looked like a lost detective in broad daylight. I decided to take a risk. Crossing to the cafe, I ordered a tea I didn't want and sat near the window, facing the brick building. A woman at the next table was reading a thick legal binder, her highlighter flying across the page. She looked like the type who might know something. Precise hair, sharp suit, the faint perfume of someone who spent more time in courtrooms than coffee shops. After a few minutes, I leaned over and asked casually if she knew what kind of place that was. She looked at me for a long second before answering, as if weighing whether I was worth the truth. "That," she said finally, "isn't exactly a public business. It's a private legal office. Discreet services, mostly family agreements." Her eyes flicked toward the building, then back to me. People go there when they don't want something traced through the usual channels. The words made my stomach tighten. Family agreements. My mind leapt immediately to Clara's pregnancy. Adoption papers, custody deals, something about the phrase, "not traced," made it feel darker. like this wasn't about protecting privacy, but about hiding motives. I thanked her, but she was already packing her binder, as if she'd said more than she should have. By the time I got home, my chest felt tight with unease. I tried to tell myself I could wait, gather more proof before acting, but patience was eroding fast. So I did something reckless. I called an old college friend, Melissa, who now worked as a legal assistant downtown. She had always been good at finding things she wasn't supposed to, and she owed me more than one favor. "Hannah," she said after I explained, "I can't pull actual records without risking my job, but I can check who the lawyer is and what cases they've been involved in. If you're right, and it's about custody or guardianship, there might be a paper trail, just hidden deep." For the first time in days, I felt like I had a thread to pull, but even as I thanked her, a shadow of dread curled in my chest, because if Melissa did find something, I already suspected it would confirm my worst fear, that the signature Clara gave away wasn't just hers, it was about the child, and it was a decision made to shut me out completely. Melissa didn't call me for 2 days, and each hour felt like a taut wire pulling tighter in my chest. I barely slept, checking my phone every time I rolled over in bed. By the third morning, when I saw her name flash on my screen, my breath caught before I even answered. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "Hannah, I found something, but you're not going to like it." That was when I knew. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. She explained that the office belonged to a man named Gregory Haldane, a family lawyer known for handling sensitive arrangements for wealthy clients. His reputation wasn't exactly illegal, but it was murky. He specialized in agreements that sidestepped court oversight. "What I found," she continued, "is that 2 weeks ago, Clara signed a pre-birth custody agreement. It essentially names Andrew as the sole guardian of the baby. Your name isn't anywhere on it." I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers hurt. "But that doesn't even make sense," I whispered, pacing the kitchen. "Why would Clara give Andrew sole guardianship? She's married to Michael. That's his child." My words faltered, because deep down, something was starting to click, a puzzle piece I'd been refusing to pick up. Melissa hesitated before answering. "Hannah, the document states that Andrew is the biological father." The room spun. I gripped the counter as if the ground had tilted under me. My husband, the man who'd sat beside me at that baby shower, whose hand had brushed mine while Clara smiled across the table, was listed as the father of her child. The betrayal was so sharp it felt physical, like something tearing in my chest. I could hear Melissa's voice asking if I was still there, but I couldn't force words out. My ears rang with a hollow, rushing sound. Memories began to stitch themselves together in a sickening new pattern. The late-night phone calls Andrew took in the garage, the unexplained weekends, helping his brother, the way Clara's eyes sometimes lingered on him longer than they should have. Every time I'd questioned him, he'd smoothed it over with that calm, measured voice, convincing me I was overthinking. But now I could see it for what it was, manipulation. Melissa's voice broke through again. "Hannah, this agreement, it means that unless Clara changes her mind, you have no legal standing. If something happens to her, Andrew has full custody, and you'd have no rights to be involved at all." My knees felt weak, and I sank into a chair, my hands shaking. I wanted to scream, cry, demand answers, but at that moment, all I could feel was the cold weight of realization settling in my bones. As we hung up, one truth became clear. This wasn't just about a baby. This was about my entire life being rewritten without my knowledge, and if I didn't act soon, I'd be erased from the story entirely. I didn't knock when I came home that evening. I didn't even take off my coat. My pulse was a steady, pounding drum in my ears, drowning out the creak of the door hinges and the faint smell of Andrew's cologne that always lingered in the air. He was sitting at the dining table, casually scrolling through his phone, a glass of whiskey half drunk in front of him. He looked up, surprised but not alarmed, at least not yet. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. His brow furrowed in mild irritation, the same expression he wore whenever I interrupted him during one of his unwind sessions. "Can it wait until—" "No, Andrew," I cut him off, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "It can't." I dropped my bag onto the table with a thud and pulled out the printed document Melissa had sent me that morning. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, but my eyes stayed locked on his face. "I know," I said flatly. "I know about the custody agreement, and I know the baby is yours." For a moment, his expression was unreadable. Then his jaw tightened. his gaze shifting to the document as if it were some irrelevant nuisance he could brush away. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "From someone who actually cares about the truth," I shot back. "But don't you dare turn this on me. You've been lying to me for months. Years, maybe. Was it going on when Clara and Michael first got together? Or did you wait until after you stood up as his best man to start sleeping with his wife?" He leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose like he was trying to keep control. "Hannah, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I laughed bitterly, my voice rising. "No, Andrew. Missing a flight is complicated. Losing your keys is complicated. This is betrayal. This is deception. You didn't just cheat. You conspired to build an entire life with her behind my back. You planned for a child. And then you made sure I'd have no place in any of it." His silence was worse than any denial. He didn't even try to protest his innocence. That told me more than any confession could. "I loved you," I said, my voice breaking now, the anger bleeding into grief. "I built my life around you. And you've been living 2 lives. Do you even realize what you've done to me? To us?" He finally spoke, his tone maddeningly calm. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Clara was going through a lot. Michael didn't understand her. Not like I did. We didn't plan for this, Hannah. It just happened." My nails dug into my palms. "Stop trying to romanticize it. You chose this. Every text, every meeting, every secret you kept. You chose it over me. And then you had the audacity to make legal arrangements to shut me out completely. What kind of man does that to his wife?" Something in his expression flickered. Shame, maybe. Or just the recognition that I wasn't going to back down. "I didn't think you'd want to be involved," he said quietly, and the cruelty of it was almost laughable. "You didn't think I'd want to be involved?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You mean you didn't want me to have a say? You wanted control. You wanted her and the baby without the inconvenience of your wife asking questions." The silence between us stretched, thick and heavy. He looked away first, his gaze sliding toward the window as if the sight of the quiet street outside might offer an escape. "I can't believe you," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "Do you have any idea what it felt like? Sitting in that baby shower, hearing Clara tell me I'd never hold her child? And now I know why she was so confident, because you'd already promised her I wouldn't." Andrew's face remained still, but I could see his knuckles whiten around the edge of the table. "Hannah, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my voice now low and deadly. "You've been playing house with her while keeping me on standby to keep up appearances. You thought I'd stay quiet, maybe cry in private, but not disrupt your perfect little arrangement. Well, Andrew, you're wrong." I pushed the papers toward him, the pages sliding across the table until they landed against his glass. "This agreement is worthless now, because I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what you've done. Clara, Michael, your parents, her parents. And if you think I'm going to walk away quietly while you play daddy to her baby, you have no idea who you married." For the first time since I'd walked in, his composure cracked, his jaw clenched harder, his nostrils flared, and I saw the faintest trace of panic in his eyes. "Hannah, don't do this," he said, his voice low but edged with urgency. "It'll destroy everything." "Good," I replied, my voice steady now, cold with resolve. "It should." I turned to leave, my bag slung over my shoulder, but paused at the doorway. "One more thing," I said, without looking back. "You don't get to decide what I'm a part of, not anymore. And if you think this is over, it's just beginning." The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed in the quiet hall. My hands were still trembling, my heart pounding, but beneath the chaos of my emotions, there was a spark of something I hadn't felt in weeks: power. The truth was out between us now, and for the first time, I wasn't the one hiding from it. As I walked into the cold night air, I realized that I wasn't just confronting a betrayal. I was dismantling the life I'd been tricked into believing was real, and somewhere, in the wreckage of it all, I knew I'd find a way to build something stronger, something that belonged entirely to me. The morning after my confrontation with Andrew, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating violently on the nightstand. I had barely slept, my mind replaying every word we'd exchanged, every moment in the past 2 years that now felt like a carefully constructed lie. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't expected to see: Michael, Clara's husband. My heart pounded. I answered cautiously. "Michael?" His voice was flat, stripped of its usual warmth. "We need to meet. Today. Alone." There was a weight in those words that made my stomach twist. Within an hour, I found myself sitting across from him at a small coffee shop downtown, the kind of place where no one pays attention to anyone else. Michael looked like he hadn't slept either, his hair unkempt, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't waste time on small talk. "I know about Andrew and Clara," he said, his voice low but steady. "I've known for weeks, but that's not why I called you." I froze, unsure where he was going with this. "Then why?" He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly around his coffee cup. "Because the baby isn't Andrew's." The words didn't land right at first. They just hung in the air, strange and unreal. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael's jaw tightened. "Clara let Andrew believe it's his because she knew he'd protect her. He's been willing to sign anything, give her anything, because he thinks he's the father. But the truth? The baby's mine. And Clara doesn't want me anywhere near it." I sat there stunned, my mind spinning so fast I could barely form words. "Why would she?" "Because she hates me," he interrupted, "and she wants to punish me. I cheated on her 2 years ago. She never forgave me. This," he gestured vaguely toward the idea of the baby, the mess, "is her revenge. And Andrew, he's just her shield." I felt like the floor had shifted beneath me. All this time, I had been drowning in betrayal, believing Andrew had fathered a child with her. Now, there was another betrayal entirely, layered, calculated, cruel in a different way. Clara had manipulated all of us. Michael's voice broke slightly as he went on. "I didn't come to you for pity. I came because you deserve to know the truth before Andrew drags you through hell for a child that isn't even his." The rest of our conversation blurred into a haze of half-heard sentences and too hot coffee cooling between us. When I finally walked out of the cafe, the cold air bit into my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was already racing ahead, piecing together a plan. That evening, I went back to the house. Andrew was there, sitting in the living room with his laptop open, pretending to work. I stood in the doorway until he looked up. "We need to talk," I said, echoing the way I'd started our last conversation. His eyes narrowed, wary. "About what?" "About the fact that you're fighting for a child that isn't even yours." The change in his face was instantaneous. The color drained from his skin, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't quite form a defense. "Who told you that?" he finally managed. "It doesn't matter," I said sharply. "What matters is that you've built this fantasy where you and Clara are some tragic love story. But the truth is she's been playing you, using you, and you've been too blinded by guilt, or lust, to see it." He tried to speak, but I cut him off, stepping closer. "I'm not here to save you, Andrew. I'm here to tell you that I'm done. I'm leaving, and I'm taking every piece of leverage I have with me. You can deal with the wreckage you've created without me." I walked past him to the study, opened the desk drawer, and pulled out the folder Melissa had sent me. The custody agreement, the texts, the bank transfers, all of it. "One day, when you finally realize Clara never loved you, you'll remember this moment," I said, holding the papers up. "And you'll know I was the last person who told you the truth. He didn't follow me when I left. He didn't call out. The house stayed silent, and that silence told me everything I needed to know." 2 weeks later, I heard from Melissa again. Clara had given birth, and in the chaos of the hospital room, with Michael demanding a DNA test, the truth had exploded into the open. The baby was his. Clara had screamed, Andrew had walked out, and Michael now had the child Clara swore I'd never hold. And yet, a month later, I found myself in his living room, cradling the baby in my arms. She was tiny, impossibly warm, with eyes that blinked slowly like she was still learning the world. Michael had tears in his eyes when he whispered, "I wanted you to be the first to hold her outside of me." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but in that moment, with the baby's small fingers curling around mine, I realized something profound. The people who try to keep you out of their story often do it because they're afraid of the role you might play in it. And sometimes, against all odds, you get to rewrite the ending anyway.